Hello War of the Vision community, Raindell here, and today we are going to be talking about building the King Mont himself. And the idea here, and why I released this ahead of time, is to give you guys a chance to take a look at some possibilities that he can do, see if that seems fun to you and something you'd like to use, and then if you have those resources that will, in my opinion, lead to some of his strongest builds, so that can lead into your decision of going for him, or perhaps not. So we'll go through several builds that I think are all interesting in their own scenarios, and then we'll also talk about some good partners for King Mont and some counters that you're going to want to avoid if you're running him. So let's dive into it. The first build I'm going to talk about is making King Mont into an AOE Resistance Tank. Now, AOE Resistance is a resistance that reduces damage from any attack that is not a single target attack. It's something that's pretty niche, and with his release, it's the first time that we're going to be able to build for that. The reason for that is his TMR. It has an ability on it which in an AoE around the caster gives plus 25 AoE attack resistance for 3 turns. That's really cool. It opens up some cool possibilities. And what we can do with that is pair that with his Master ability, which increases his own AoE resistance by 15, and then one of the 2 vision cards that we have in the game that increase AoE resistance by 20%. Now, if you don't have Death Machine, or the Winter Water card. I'm not sure how to call that. I think Holiday Party. Yeah, Winter Holiday Party. If you don't have any of those, well, you just cut 5 from those AoE resist numbers I've put on screen, and you can still use the Bloody Moon card. So it's not out of your reach if you're playing a game without all those limited cards. But the general idea here is with Death Machine or with Winter Holiday Party, King Mont himself will have 35 base AoE resistance, and then all your teammates will begin the fight with 20%. Now, once he uses his buff from his TMR, the allies that are affected will have 45% mitigation from AoE attacks. That's almost half. And then he himself will mitigate them by 60%. What's super cool about that is usually when you run a tank, you're afraid of your team grouping up because your squishier characters can die even though your tank has some hate, right? They're just like, they're hit by these AoE attacks, they take full damage and they go down. With this build, 2 scenarios might happen. They might get hit by AoE attacks still, but with the reduced damage they'll take, they won't go down. They'll probably take 2 to 3 hits before being dead, and that means they get to do their job. The other option is the enemy attack might become a single target attack. The AI will always pick the attack that deals the most damage. So if your team is super resistant to AoE, well, there's a good chance the AI on the enemy side will instead opt for a single target attack on your King Mont and then avoid the rest of your team altogether. So that's the whole idea behind the build, and I think it can be a very powerful one. If I do get King Mont, it's the first build I'm going to try. It's the one that seems the strongest and the most fun for me. And then on top of that, King Mont is still going to be very hard to kill from physical attackers, right? He has 8200 HP, 54 defense, he's super fast at 83 agility, and then has a move of 4, jump of 2. Overall, that's a crazy strong build. Again, you don't have Death Machine, you can go Winter Holiday Party. You don't have Winter Holiday Party, go Bloody Moon. It's an MR card. Most accounts should have access to it, and if you don't have it, well, you will probably pull it in the future. Then this build obviously has some weaknesses, right? And I think these are the weaknesses that King Mont will have basically no matter what. He's weaker to magic, but this time he's only really weak to single target magic, so that's still not that bad. And then he's going to be weak to, basically attacks from targets with high defense penetration, because he's using defense as his main means of survivability against physical attacks. So yeah, but again, those people with high defense penetration will only be a real threat to him if they use single target attacks. So yeah, that seems like a pretty well-rounded build, and then one that's very strong, I think. Okay, for our second build, let's look at a build that I call the Commander build. The idea here is you want to have a little bit less defense. Now, he's still going to be super tanky, no, don't worry. But you don't get a specialized type of build like the AOE Resistance, and instead, you go for some higher attack so that your King Mont deals some serious damage. And then, since he's going to be running the Ifrit card, he also provides more attack for the rest of your team. So if you're pairing him with physical attackers, this is a good build to make sure that your entire team hits really hard. And then he's going to provide like slash resist down for enemies and just make sure that the rest of your team hits even harder. So the idea here is really you swap the Shikuchi that we had in the previous build for Nightblade Mastery. That gives you more accuracy, more damage. Then you put Ifrit on him. He gets more fire attack and then more damage again. And I guess I forgot to mention, but in the previous build as well, I was using the Firebrand. In JP, this sword was released very shortly after, or together with King Mont, I'm not exactly sure. And then it's a sword that gives fire attack up, just like the Icebrand. For him, if you want him to do damage, it will be best in slot. So I'm using it for all those builds that focus on damage, because if we follow the JP schedule, it'll be released with him. If it's not, for some reason, put the Lysalia Ice Blade on him, and if you don't have them, well, you're in Garok or whatever sword you do have, really. Not the end of the world. But if we do get the Firebrand, it will be the best sword, especially for this build, which is relying on more attack. So, you get a high attack, you increase your team's offense, and you're still very tanky versus physical attacks, right? 59 defense, 8000 HP is still insane, even though he has over 1000 attack. Also pretty decent accuracy, but 35 accuracy up will not be enough to fight dedicated evasion teams, so don't expect him to hit to be reliably with this. What you suffer from if you run this build, though, is less mobility. We took out Shikuchi, we have some less agility as well, so we'll move slower, and we won't necessarily be the first one in front to tank these early attacks from the enemy team. Okay, our third build I called Fondu au fromage, and the idea here is fondu au fromage means cheese, melted cheese, or gratin. So the idea is we are cherry picking. This is a build that's about countering specific characters and just cheesing your way to victory, really, hence the name. So what we want is a resistance build. But this guy has such crazy base resistances and then access to the Nightblade job's double resist that he can go for multiple very high resistances. I think that's very interesting. So this is also one of the builds, the only build actually for today, where we are taking into account vision cards from other party members. So for this build, you need to go for resistances on everybody unless you just want one of those resistances, in which case put that vision card on King Mont. So let's take a look. We have 70 slash resist, 40 base pierce resist, but then with double resist on, that goes to 65 for 3 turns. Same for missile resist, begins at 50, but if you use double resist, you now have 75 missile resist for 3 turns. And on top of that, you have 48 defense, 8000 HP. You're going to be really hard to kill if one of your enemies uses, or the entire enemy team only uses those damage types. Now, what you're giving up for this build is a lot of offense. We're back to 700 something attack. We don't even have a weapon here. So this is not going to be the hardest hitting build for sure. And then you require your allies to use specific vision cards, and you need high, like either +5 MR gear, in which case you'll have a little bit less, but still really good resistances, or you need +5 UR gear from raids, and that's not something everybody has access to. So it's not a build that's easy to pull off for everybody. Now, how do we get to those really high resistance numbers? Well, I'm putting the calculations on screen. I won't read it all. You guys can pause the video, take a screenshot if you want, but that's how we got to those numbers. So it's not a mistake. It really does get that high. Okay, next build. Now, the next build is not one I would recommend that much. I called it the Whose Reign build, because really, if you want to use King Mont against magic users, this is probably the way to go. But why would you use Mont against magic users? He's not specialized for that. He's a really good physical tank, not a magic tank. Still though, if you do use him, well, you can give him Tidus's Necklace, Fenrir, and then Farron Vision card, and then get him to 50% magic resistance. Then pair him with a Spellblade, 86% magic resistance. You're fine. Go fight those mages. They probably won't really hit you hard. So yeah, he can pull it off. A lot of tanks in the game have like a base minus 30% magic resist, or a really large weakness to magic. Since he doesn't have that, it's possible to get him very resistant to magic, and this build will give you just that. Again though, you're giving off on some offense, and if you want this to be very effective, you probably need a Spellblade ally, so you have a little bit less options in terms of how you can build your team. Just like last time, here's a breakdown on how you can get to those high numbers of magic resistance. If you need some more details, pause the screen, go take a look at these things, and you'll have the total. And also, we are taking into account Fenrir when he gets his 3-star version, because that should be in the near future. In the meantime, you'll have 5 less magic resistance. Currently, he caps at 15. With 3 stars, he'll actually give 20. So if you were to do this build immediately upon King Mont's release, you'll have a little bit less, 45 to 81 magic resistance instead. Still pretty good and pretty reliable, I think. Okay, what are some good partners for our king? Well, if you're trying to do the resistance build, I think To Be will be a great character to pair against with him. Now, you might lose on one of those other resistances because To Be really performs better with her own vision cards, so you won't be running Solidus or Mask of Deceit or Leviathan on her. But what you get is the fact that she'll increase strike and slash resistance by 20% for a couple turns, meaning that King Mont will go into battle with 90% slash resistance. That's insane. Slash is still the most common damage type in the game. And then the biggest counter to this build are characters with slash resistance down, but they aren't all that common. Now, obviously, in the near future, we'll have a ton of other King Monts who will reduce slash resistance, so take that into account. It might not be that reliable when you fight other King Monts. And then, for the magic resistance build, as I mentioned, you're going to want to pair him with a Spellblade. Now, who's a super strong Spellblade that's coming in the near future? Black Rose Helena. Otherwise, there are a lot of others. I only put a couple on screen, but I think Ildira provides some decent healing, the ability to make him go further on the battlefield very early with her limit break, and then some okay magic attacks. And also, you could give her the AOE Resistance card so that you use sort of 2 of those builds at the same time, high AOE Resistance and also high magic resist. Otherwise, Elsirel is also a pretty cool character. She leverages the fact that King Mont reduces slash resistance, and so she can deal a ton of damage after she's supported him in the side of magic resistance. What are some enemies you might want to avoid? Well, for most of our builds, as you've probably noticed, we have very high amounts of defense on King Mont, and it's actually his main way of surviving against physical punishment. So you want to avoid enemies with a lot of defense penetration. Now, most characters with defense penetration in the game right now have 40%, which is not the end of the world. It's high, but you will still mitigate a lot of their damage. I would be very wary, however, of snipers, especially Winter Victora. She can get to 100% defense penetration and just completely ignore all your defense. On top of that, she's water. Be very careful fighting her. Nivlu cannot get to 100%, but she can still get to a very high total amount of defense penetration, and then she can reduce your defense on top. So also an enemy you might want to avoid. And then Alim can get to actually 60% or 75% if she uses her own TMR. So I could see a case for Alim being used as a counter to King Mont, especially paired with the Astrologer card. Food for thought. Then another type of thing you might want to avoid is Drain Force builds. Drain Force is an ability that hits you based on the user's maximum HP. So they'll ignore your defense and all your resistances and just hit you for the amount of damage they do. So in a lot of builds, they're going to either 3-shot or 2-shot you. And so you have to be wary of picking those opponents. So I would say on top of that, of course, avoid magic unless you're built for magic resistance, because you will not perform as well against those enemies. And then I think the weakness to Strike is not the end of the world, considering the fact that he has a lot of defense. But please, avoid fighting a Xiza with the Oldoa's TMR. She will have 90% defense penetration, and then use your strike attack weakness to deal 9,000 damage to you and one-shot you. Xiza will do that. Be aware of it. Okay. So, I guess that's it. Hopefully you guys found it interesting. I had a lot of fun doing this for To Be a 9S, and then I wasn't sure about publishing this video before King Mont is released, but when I did it for To Be, I did it before building her, and then I ran those builds in game, and it went very, very well. So I'm rather confident in my ability to predict how things are gonna go. Now, if you do try those builds, let me know how it goes. I really want to know, especially since I might not pull him. But hey, there we go. Hopefully you guys like it. If you did, please like and subscribe. It will make it more likely that you see my content in the future. And then as always, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.